In order to have a better understanding of why we're here this morning, I'll give a very brief explanation of how this particular conference came about. Last year, when I realized that legalizing physician-assisted suicide was on the political horizon, for advice and inspiration, I turned to Sister Virginia Joy and Sister Jude Pia, who were directing pro-life activities with the Sisters of Life in New York. And they immediately recommended the Carmelite Sisters and Sister Peter. I then contacted the New York State Conference of Catholic Bishops in Albany because I thought initially that I'd have a panel discussion with someone from the Bishops Association and Sister. And then when I spoke with Mrs. Kathleen Gallagher, who's the director of pro-life activities there, she said that Sister Peter's presentation was so important that it necessitated a morning all by itself. So then last June, we hosted at Regina Caeli, a conference with Kathleen Gallagher, and she explained what's going on with physician-assisted suicide. So after that, I received a third recommendation, and this time it was from Washington, D.C. I was visiting with my brother-in-law, who worked for years with the Catholic Health Association in D.C., and that's a Catholic advocacy group for nursing homes and Catholic hospitals. And I was bemoaning the fact that with abortion expansion and soon to be legalized physician-assisted suicide, New York was becoming a very dangerous place to be vulnerable or weak in. And he immediately said, "I know the perfect person for you to help you out with your seminar, and her name is Sister Peter." So he was delighted to hear that she had already agreed to assist us. So we have recommendations from 3 trusted friends in very important cities, New York, Albany, and Washington, D.C. They're all very faithful Catholic sources. Now, I think that for all of us, the value of the next 2 to 2.5 hours will be inestimable. Sister will speak with us about suffering and caring for the terminally ill and dying person. Because of original sin, suffering is unavoidable. Because of God's unfathomable love, we are charged with loving and caring for each other and to suffer with each other. It's inevitable that we will be either on the giving or receiving end of this care. For some of us, eventually, we will experience both. Sister will lead us to a broader and deeper understanding of the suffering of those who are near death. We require this in order to be confident as we stand up to a secular, moral relativistic, postmodern culture that pushes suicide as dignified, even compassionate. And this lie will soon be legalized in New York if we do not combat it. Sister speaks from experience. She is the director of gerontology at the Avila Institute, a palliative care center in Germantown, and a nationally respected advocate for care for those who are dying. I am honored and delighted to introduce to you Sister M. Peter Lillian DiMaria of the Carmelite Sisters in Germantown. Please welcome her.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you, Martha, for your introduction. And I hope that the next couple hours, I can't believe you're here on a Saturday to talk about suffering. It's so beautiful outside. But I'm hoping that when we get through today, I'll just give you some examples and reasons why it's so important that we continue to talk the truth. I think what's happened in our country is we've lost truth. There is a right and there is a wrong. And unfortunately, it seems to me that anything goes when it comes to your own opinion. So you can make everything that could be wrong, as long as you give a good opinion about it, it slowly becomes right. But there are still truth. And the truth is, life is to be respected. Life is a gift from God. And life, in all its wonder, is to be brought back to God when God asks to return to Him. Unfortunately, if you see what's happening throughout, not only in New York, but throughout the country, assisted suicide is starting to take hold because it's such a wonderful way to go. It's such a beautiful way to be able to choose when I will die. And I can have everyone around me, and this is the day, and you'll meet. We've forgotten that the Creator is the person, is the being who is in charge of our life, and we are bringing this gift back to the Lord. I think also what we've not been able to do is to remember what suffering is. And none of us wants to suffer. I don't think if I said to you before you leave this room, I want everyone to pick one of these sufferings before you go home, you're going to look at me and say, sister, what are you talking about? We have no idea what kind of suffering will be coming. And I'm sure every single one of you right now in this room has suffered at least one time in your life. And in that suffering, you were able to get through it. And I know that many times the elderly that we care for, when we ask, and I hear these stories that they tell me, about what their life has been like. And then they say to me, sister, and I say, how did you get through that? How did you lose your husband at age 24 and raised 5 children? How were you able to then, one of your children got killed in a car accident? How did you get through all of that? And they say, it was my faith. It was my faith, my family, my friends, my support systems. I'm really worried about our country today because I'm not sure where faith is anymore. What do people turn to? The minute they get a debilitating illness diagnosis, not everybody, I'm not saying, I'm not talking about anybody in this room, but people they Google it right away. And they spend 3 hours reading everything about their diagnosis. I remember there was a time you went to church and you prayed and said, dear sweet Jesus, get me through this. I'm yours. Take whatever you need from me. Help me get through. Help my family get through. We turn to the Lord. We don't turn to God as often now. He's kind of been somewhat, distant. Maybe it's because we are too busy about too many things. We don't take the time. So when we're talking suffering, I love this saying by Simone Weil. She's a French philosopher. She talks about the extreme greatness of Christianity lies in the fact that it does not seek a supernatural remedy for suffering, but a supernatural use of it. I just love that. When you really think about that and you put that in perspective and you say, okay, what does that mean in regards and in relation to those of us who have to suffer and those of us who walk with those who suffer? I really think there's a big difference between pain and suffering. Pain, you can really describe it. Pain is physical. It occurs in the body. You can say, oh, it's gnawing. It's terrible. It's in my head. It's sharp. You can name it quite easily. But boy, when I ask you, tell me what you mean by your suffering, it's difficult. It's very hard. It occurs in your soul. And people find it very hard sometimes to express what that suffering means. And I'm going to give you some statistics later on, what's happening in the Oregon, because they have to keep statistics, just to let you know, they're the first state that went with assisted suicide. But when we look at suffering, and we see and we understand that, the philosophy of suffering it's the opposite of action. Because in action, a person freely initiates a series of events in order to achieve a certain goal. But when we talk suffering, what happens is a person undergoes a series of events initiated from outside, leading to connecting or something that is not chosen or desired. We don't look for suffering. It happens. And so often, we want to be able to just make it better for the person or make it better for ourselves. But we have to remember, we just have to let it go and let God. But it's so hard. It's hard, when somebody is suffering from cancer and bone cancer, which is one of the most difficult pains to relieve. That's easy for me to say, oh, you'll be fine. God will take care of it. What we need to be able to do is to say to that person, we're going to do all in our power to relieve your pain, because as Christians, it's our moral obligation to relieve suffering and to relieve pain. And I'm going to stay with you through your suffering. That's what compassion means. I stay with you during your suffering. Doesn't mean once it gets too bad, well, we'll figure out what we can do and we won't stay. Compassion has been robbed by Compassion and Choices, which used to be the Hemlock Society. They robbed our word. They say, we'll do all the things palliative care offers, but when it gets too hard and too difficult and intractable suffering is taking place, we're going to help you die by calling it medical aid in dying. Isn't that a nice way to go? And you can choose. Why should you have to suffer? Well, God, Jesus, calls us to suffer with people. That's what compassion means. That's what the word means. Pope John Paul, St. John Paul II now, he talks about then the Salvifici Dolores. It's a beautiful meditation on suffering. You can get it off on the internet. But one of the things he says is humans suffer in different ways not always considered by medicine, not even in its most advanced specializations. Suffering is wider than sickness, more complex, and more deeply rooted in humanity itself. What he's saying is, when you think about it, our physical suffering, actually, in this day and age, people should not be really suffering, having pain physically. We have so many ways on the medical field to help control pain, from nerve blocks to medications to all different ways. So that is by far the easiest pain to relieve. It's the other pains that I'm going to go into that are more difficult for people to have a handle on. Emotional pain, spiritual pain, familial pain, and certainly psychiatric pain. That's are the areas that we have to really focus on to help people when we're talking palliative care. Suffering has the capacity to ennoble or to embitter. It's all about what we do with that wound. What are we going to do with the wound, whether it is a physical wound or an emotional wound? Do we become ennobled by it, or do we become bitter? And who are in our midst that helps us see a path to holiness, a path to the communion of saints? Who are those people in our lives? Suffering can be very, very severe and pointless. It's so hard. And that might embitter us and say, why? Why was this young couple who just got married and they were on their way to their wedding, on the reception, and they get killed in a car crash, and their parents were behind them and saw it happen? Why do those things happen? And you question, say, Lord, why? They were their family is so good. And people can become very embittered by that. It's very difficult to understand. And we never know another person's suffering. It's easy for me to say, well, yeah, your mom died, but it was 3 years ago. Get over it. Who am I to say that to that person? I don't know the relationships that people have had. I don't understand from my point of view. I only understand that they are suffering, and I need to be there in that suffering. It's not for me to judge. I'm not to judge. Pain can cause, a person's world to become smaller, and the person may not see or feel the support surrounding them because that pain starts taking away from all. I feel abandoned. I feel like no one understands. And none of us, no two people suffer the same. And when I feel that somebody is not at least trying to understand what I'm experiencing, I feel misunderstood, and then I feel lonely. When I start feeling lonely, misunderstood, I'm becoming a burden, I don't have any choices, that's when assisted suicide looks better. And that's what we have to help combat. There is a better way, and that way is palliative care. We have many ways, as I said, to alleviate suffering, especially physical suffering, but we're still going to die, no matter what we do. And are we ready to make that commitment to our Lord to know that I will go in your time, Jesus? It's a human reality, suffering, and it's not something to be solved. Suffering truly is a mystery. And people want to have the answers to everything. That's why they love the internet. How many people have sit at the table and it's like, how old was so-and-so when he died? I don't know, let me just look it up right here. We want all the answers so quickly now. But we have to understand, what the virtue of patience. We have to understand what suffering means. That compassion calls us to suffer with people. Again, being those of us who are of our Christian faith, our Catholic faith, we're here to walk that journey and accompany one another through our suffering. As Catholics, we believe that people are stewards rather than owners of their own bodies and are accountable to God for the life that has been given to them. And for this reason, life is said to be sacred. I don't know if we have people understanding the sacredness of life anymore. The other day, I happened to be reading something, and it happened in Florida. There was a woman who was walking by. There were these sea turtles were nesting, and they were in their gestation period. So there were signs everywhere, don't disturb the sea turtles. So this woman went by, and I don't know if she didn't see the sign or what, but she took a stick and she was beating on the little eggs and everything, and somebody came along and got her, and she was arrested for, doing this. Well, the reason is because federal law protects. They're an endangered species. So in their gestation period, if you're obviously poking at their eggs and stomping on them in their nests, they're not going to become sea turtles. Federal law protects them, okay? Federal law does not protect a child in a womb, but the sea turtle is protected. I don't want anything happening to sea turtles, please. I don't, But my point is, have we forgotten what life is and how it should be respected? I don't know. How could we as a society say, yes, we don't want the endangered species to go? If you believe that that egg is going to become a turtle, then what is in the womb of a human being, of another human being? It's another human being, it's another life, it's another body. So we need to respect that body as well, their body. So I think we've gotten off on what is respecting life. What does life mean? Why is it sacred? It's very important, and it's imperative that we treat those who are suffering in the context of our faith, and to understand that when we can no longer cure, then care is essential. And that is in our ethical religious directives. As healthcare providers, we follow the ERDs, is what we call them. And this is written by the bishops. And it's an absolutely wonderful document, especially when it comes to Section 5 about those who are very ill. It quotes scripture, and it's what we have to follow as a Catholic institution. Our community, the Carmelite Sisters for the Aged and Infirm, we have 17 long-term care facilities throughout the United States and one in Ireland. And we care for the elderly. That's what our whole life is about. That's what we profess. And we take it very serious. We know that what we need to do is care for these most vulnerable people. Why? You can have people saying, they're 102. Why are you doing this? They're going to die anyway. Can you imagine how vulnerable and frail our elderly are? And how they can very easily, with this slippery slope, when it comes to assisted suicide, be the first to be able to say, we won't need nursing homes. We won't need, they have Alzheimer's. Why bother? They're going to die. People can get very much into a slippery slope when we don't respect life. Every life is to be respected. Every life is to be respected. So what does this care look like? Well, we have to learn to be compassionate listeners. And what does that call us to do? It challenges us to be one in the ministry we share, to bring peace to those who feel abandoned. It allows us to share in the silence of the person's inner being that's suffering, opening their hearts and bringing a new hope within. We're very fortunate in our our work, especially those of us of the Christian faith. Compassionate listening, Jesus did it throughout the scriptures. If you want to learn about how to relieve suffering in every aspect, read the scriptures, meditate on the scriptures, do theological reflection, a tool that can keep us so focused on when people say to you, why are you so against assisted suicide? I don't understand it. Why do you want to watch somebody suffer? People don't understand that what we are saying is we are respecting this person's life and God is in charge. We are not going to abandon that person through their suffering. We will be there in every aspect, and we will relieve the suffering as best that we possibly can. When Jesus, throughout the scriptures, is talking, he listens with his hearts and becomes one with each person. That's so important for us to be able to do. It might be the neighbor who has a mother who has Alzheimer's and she's caring for that person 24/7. And one of us in this room, all we have to do to offer some support so that suffering is relieved a bit for both the person who has the Alzheimer's and the person who is caring for is just to go over and say, you know what, I've got a couple hours. Why don't you go out and go shopping? Or just go get your hair done. I can sit with your mom. Those are the things we have to do. That's a palliative care moment of helping someone so that I don't feel like I'm at my wit's end and there is nothing else that I can possibly do. I have nowhere to turn. We as, our Christians are certainly helping to maybe understand so that people, as we listen, we can inspire them and to see that they aren't alone and we can connect the dots and help them to see that God is with them through this suffering. In Matthew 9:35, we find that Jesus went around to all the towns and villages, teaching in their synagogues, proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom, and curing every disease and illness. Jesus did think about, and when I think about this, and it's so awesome when you think about Jesus, by his example, taught us how we just have to live our lives. During that time, there was slavery going on. But Jesus knew he had to each day, whatever came his way, whatever challenge it was, he took on that challenge and took each day with his Father's help to help people to bring brought closer to his own Father. He listened to the challenge. And at the sight of the crowds, his heart was moved with pity for them because they were troubled and abandoned like sheep without a shepherd. That's what he calls us to, is to see what our neighbor needs, to be compassionate to our brothers and sisters. Think about the story of the Good Samaritan. I don't have to read that to you. I know you know it well. But when you put it in perspective, these people just walked by, but it was the Samaritan, and at that time, the Samaritans weren't the nicest, they didn't consider them the nicest people. But he's the one who stops. He's the one who takes care of the person. And I read something one time, and I think it's a really beautiful meditation for all of us to think about. And the Good Samaritan, when he brings him to the innkeeper, what does he say? He says, he gives him some money, and he says, if this is not enough, on my way back, I will pay you for what else I should have given you, for the care that you're going to give to this person. So I will repay you whatever I owe. To me, that's the Lord saying to us, we see people along the way who are suffering. And what he's asking us to do is to care in any way that we can. We might not be the doctor. We might be just a person who's going to listen. So along the way, and when he calls me to himself, he's probably going to say, this is what I believe the Lord's going to ask. Sister Peter, how did you love? What are the ways that you showed love to me? And I can think of all, maybe, hopefully, I know I have a long way to go yet, but all the things that I may have done when I saw someone who was suffering in some way. That I've lived that Good Samaritan gospel that the Lord taught us. And he explained, when Jesus in Luke says he answered the one who, not Jesus, but the person, when he asked, they answered, the one who treated him with mercy, Jesus said to him, go and do likewise. A pretty simple thing. He's not saying, I want you to go and heal people of their physical ailments. I'm just asking you to be present to someone in their suffering. If we were more present to people, maybe we would not hear about assisted suicide. What does he teach us? He says that skills do not make us better listeners. We have to, as Jesus taught us, to have a deep desire to connect with another person and to understand where they are. Presence, I often think, and actually it was one of our sisters who was in our spiritual care class, it said that we need an eighth sacrament, and that eighth sacrament could be presence. Just being totally present to one another. In this day and age, I don't know how well presence is. I travel all over the country. I'm in planes, I'm in mostly planes and cars usually. And I oftentimes, in between my planes, I'm running from one to another, and I have to stop and I get something to eat. And I see families traveling, probably on a trip that they couldn't wait to get together and just do this wonderful trip. And they're sitting there, and everybody's on their cell phones talking to somebody else. And I'm thinking, I'm so glad they're present to one another. We've learned that being attached to this phone sometimes is being present, and we're not present to the very person that's sitting across from us. I don't know about you, but in ancient times when I was growing up, we had a rotary phone. Do you remember what those looked like? And I remember when I was first professed and I had to go to Iowa, that was like the end of the world for me. I had no idea where Iowa was, but we have a home in Iowa, and that was my first mission. And I remember my mother and father brought me to the airport, and I said to them, I'll call you when I get to Chicago, because I had to change in Chicago and then go on to the Quad Cities. I get to Chicago, and what do first thing I do? Do you remember a pay phone? I looked for the pay phone. I had to wait in line because everybody was waiting to use the phone. And I called my mom and dad and says, I'm in Chicago, I'm okay. I'll let you know when I get to the Quad Cities, when I get into Moline. I was going out with one of our sisters one time. She was going to the dentist with me, and she was taking a ride. Or maybe I was taking her. But anyways, there was two of us in the car. And I have to say, I'm at the end of the road of our mother house, and I'm getting onto Route 6, and I said, oh, no, I forgot my cell phone. She was an older, much wiser sister than I. She said to me, don't worry about it. The Blessed Mother will take care of us in the next couple hours. Where have we lost that feeling of faith, of love? If we turn to God for everything, but I don't feel like, it's just me. I'm not saying any of you are doing this, but I just feel this sense of we're kind of losing our way. And if we lose our way, we lose our respect for our life, for our human being, of who we are. And it's so important that we stop the distractions and just realize the wealth that we have in one another. That all of these things are just passing. This assisted suicide is not the way to go when it comes to healing. Luke, Jesus says, as he drew near to the gate of the city, a man who had died was being carried out, the only son of his mother, and she was a widow. A large crowd from the city was with her. When the Lord saw her, he was moved with pity for her and said to her, do not weep. How often do we say that to one another, following in the steps of Jesus? So we are one in the ministry, understanding what empathy truly means. I may not know what it's like to have Alzheimer's. I may not know what it's like for you to be caring for your family member who has Alzheimer's, but I certainly can listen to what you have to say, not judge, but just listen and be present to you. And to affirm, because when we listen with our eyes as Jesus did, we bring peace. And peace is the measuring of healing. I may not get rid of that cancer, but if I'm peaceful, that is telling me that I've been healed. And in Matthew, we see when he disembarked and saw the vast crowd with his eyes, His heart was moved in pity for them, and he cured their sick. They had all seen him and were terrified. But at once he spoke with them and said, "Take courage, it is I, do not be afraid." How often do we say that to people? Please, take courage, I'm here. Let's pray together. God is with us. It is so very, very important. He calmed their fears. He understood when a person was anxious. He understood very well that sharing in the silence of one's hearts meant that knowing what was behind the words. To really, if you really truly listen, people say, you say, "How are you?" And they say, "I'm fine." And you're glad they said, "I'm fine," and you keep walking. We need to stop and say, "Are you really fine?" I see, when you come into church, you seem so tired. Is there something that I can do? See, my point being is that if we don't reach out to one another as Christians and help alleviate some of that pain and suffering, then the government is going to take over. They're telling us now, watch the shows, watch what you're, on anything on TV, the movies and such. They're subtle. It's this insidious way of saying it's okay to decide when you want to die. It's okay for you to, it's your body, it's your decision. And we hear it and we're bombarded, and I worry very much about our young people because they're bombarded by this. And what they read and what they see and what they talk about and what they're, it's getting very, very in a place where we need to be able to take hold and say, "No, sit down. There's a right and there's a wrong." But I think what happens is well, let me hear your opinion. What do you think, honey? Let me see. It happens in schools, I would assume, too. Okay, let's hear your opinions. No, we still have to teach what's right and wrong. And what does Jesus do in his compassionate listening? He listens to the person, to their deep, deep area of where we can find that inner peace, and he opens them to a new hope. See, once people lose hope, once you lose hope, you don't want to live. There's nothing left. We are called to bring hope to one another. And how do we do that? We do that through palliative care. Palliative care is one of the most important pieces of anything that all of us do. And you don't have to be in healthcare to provide palliative care. Because when we use palliative care, we do what Jesus asked us to do likewise, as he did in the Good Samaritan. And what is palliative care? Well, my very good friend, and maybe some of you know him, he's a very, very good friend of mine, is Dr. Michael Brescia. He's at Calvary Hospital. And he and I spent many a day going throughout the country speaking, and he's a wonderful speaker. And a lot of what I've learned is thanks to him, and this has been many years ago. And he's one, that really introduced me to even understanding more about the 5 pains: physical, emotional, spiritual, psychiatric, and familial pain. And what he talked about is, what do those pains mean to people? And I want you to just put this in perspective. Each of us have experienced all of those pains, okay? And sometimes to a greater degree than others. We, as Carmelite sisters for the aged and infirm, we felt very strongly that we need to get the word out about palliative care. We have thousands of elderly we care for every day. I have sat by the bedside of hundreds of people who have died in my arms, and they have had peaceful deaths. Their families were with them. Everything that Compassion and Choices talks about, we do, and they go peacefully to their Lord when it's time. We're not doing anything to help, in any way, give them something that we would say, we're giving you this so that it'll be over with, we don't have to watch this anymore. We're there. We're hearing stories of the families and the person there. So palliative care to us, and this is our definition, palliative care seeks to provide relief from the 5 domains of pain that all persons experience when faced with a debilitating diagnosis. Palliative care is not reserved for those who are imminently dying. Palliative care allows each resident to receive the appropriate treatment that brings him or her comfort and the best possible care. Palliative care can be combined with curative care or with less aggressive care. Palliative care is not the same as hospice care. The important thing, or end-of-life care, which are reserved for those who are imminently dying. Palliative care continues through end-of-life care. In America, we call hospice care because you have to, have 6 months or less to live, and then your hospice benefit then kicks in. But palliative care happens all the time. We talk about it as soon as somebody comes into one of our homes, palliative care begins. Otherwise, they would want to be staying at home. So they must be experiencing some kind of pain or suffering that they need to come to us. So we begin palliative care immediately. We feel it's the best approach to care, and it gives the best possible care, allowing and addressing each individual's need. Palliative care is always provided. It's paying special attention to the 5 domains of pain, and it's given at the same time curative treatment is being administered. Hospice care always provides palliative care, paying special attention to the 5 domains of pain, and it's implemented when a person is actively dying. A cure or aggressive treatment is considered futile. Palliative care begins on admission. There's no life expectancy requirement, and it can be used to complement curative care. Hospice care is more intense. People have less than 6 months to live. The resident agrees to enroll in a hospice program, and the resident chooses not to receive aggressive curative treatment. So what are the goals of palliative care? To relieve pain, ease suffering, keep people comfortable, and provide the best possible care. Compassion and Choices will tell you that's what they do too. You see how they muddle who we are as Christians and how easy it is to find in the secular, how they can put their secular terms into something that Christ has asked us to be, compassionate to one another, to bring that compassion. So when we have the 5 pains that I mentioned, we have physical. What you would do in physical pain is you're doing the symptom control and relieving that and helping people to become comfortable. Psychiatric pain would be something like a delirium or depression. I'm going to go through each one of these. Emotional pain was when people feel a loss of relationship or they're isolated or they're unable to care for themselves. Spiritual pain is, why me? God, I've done everything I'm supposed to do. I've been to church. I go to church every day. How in the world can you have done this to me? Why do I have to have this cancer? You get angry. And familial pain, what are the roles now? How do they change? As I said about physical pain, people have some misconceptions about pain, especially in the elderly. There was a gentleman, he had this terrible pain in his knee. I can't sit, I can't stand, I can't do anything, I'm going to the doctors. So he went to the doctors. The doctor said, well, what do you expect? It's an 85-year-old knee. He said, well, my other knee's 85 and it's not bothering me. Believe the person when it comes to physical pain. And we can, it's the easiest pain to actually relieve. And there's a lot of barriers to pain knowledge, especially with the elderly, and we have to learn all that we can. So when we look at the appropriate pain assessments and we advocate, we can get people quite comfortable by using non-pharmacological or pharmacological different interventions. And usually, sometimes we have to provide more analgesics around the clock, depending on the person. But we can become, and we feel very comfortable certainly in our homes, that we have people that are comfortable, even though they've come to us with certain kinds of pain. Dr. Michael Breja in Calvary Hospital, the things that he sees, because he sees a lot of people at the very end stages of their cancer. And you walk through the hospital and people are peaceful. He knows, they know, they're a wonderful, wonderful group of doctors at Calvary Hospital. Now the psychiatric pain, that's a bit different. Psychiatric pain refers to suffering caused by alterations in cognition, mood, or behavior that go beyond a normal reaction and into this realm of psychiatric illness, such as a delirium or major depression disorder. These symptoms, if they're identified soon, especially a delirium, which is a sudden onset, they can be brought back to their baseline. Depression should be treated. All depression can be treated. And there's different ways that we treat depression. It should not, somebody just say, well, what do you want? They're old. They should be depressed. Well, thanks a lot. You know, I'm getting up there. I don't feel depressed yet. It was just recently, I knew in Massachusetts, and it must be in New York now, too. I think once you hit 65, they do a cognitive test on you, which I think is good, because you want to stay, you know, on those baselines. But I know it's my turn to do that, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I better study for it. But you can't study for a cognitive test. Either you have it or you don't. But anyway, I've been studying for 2 weeks now. I'll let you know how I do. Emotional pain. That's that type of pain that people experience, and it's so difficult that it's hard to express, and it's hard for them to name it. And I know in emotional suffering, I see it so often, certainly with our residents who have some form of dementia, whether it's Alzheimer's or dementia with Lewy body. They have this fear on their face because sometimes it's an experience, you know, for those of you that have ever worked with people with Alzheimer's who have memory loss, they may be asking the same questions over and over again. Or they may say something like, I want to go home. I want to go home. And even if you brought them home, they probably will still say, I want to go home. And in my experience, I believe what they're trying to say to us is, I want to feel safe. And the people who can make me safe are my family, my parents. Bring me home to where they are. So we have to really be understanding that even though someone maybe have a memory impairment or a confusion, they're still experiencing emotional pain, just as you and I would be experiencing emotional pain, because maybe there's some kind of a loss or a transition, or there's so many changes happening all of a sudden. My whole life has changed. My children, and now they moved to California. My grandchildren, they were the love of my life. I'm not going to see their communions. I'm not going to grow up with them now. It's going to be a whole different life. So that's a suffering, a pain, emotional pain of now I'm feeling isolated. Where do I go with that? And those who do not express their feelings may demonstrate sometimes behavioral challenges, especially those who have dementia. So when we look at that emotional pain, you know, what would you want someone to do for you if you were experiencing that? I remember, you know, I do all this flying, and I remember one time, and I have what we call, I have motion sickness. So the Lord has a great sense of humor. My whole position is I have to be on the road all the time. And as long as I drive, I don't get sick. And some people say it's because you want to be in control. No, I'm trying to tell you, if you understand motion sickness, if you're the passenger, I'm anticipating the turns. I'm thinking you're going to take a left. If you take a right, you throw my equilibrium off. But if I'm in control of the driving, I'm okay. Well, I was on a plane, and I had taken my Dramamine, which I don't take too much of it now, but I took my Dramamine, and it was wearing off. And it was an absolutely gorgeous day, and we're getting ready to land, and the stewardess says, put your tray tables up, put your seat back up, all the things we have to do, okay? Not more than 2 minutes later, I see her go running down the aisle, and she goes, everybody pay attention to me. Well, are you not going to pay attention? I mean, yeah. So we listen. She says, I want you to get into crash landing positions. You put things in perspective. Emergency landing would have sounded better. I didn't like the crash landing idea. And I really thought, did I hear her right? So there was this gentleman sitting next to me, nice burly gentleman, and I said, did she say crash landing? He said, that's what I heard. I said, okay. If he heard it and I heard it, we're in trouble. So she went back up. She was a lovely stewardess, lovely lady, but she was trying to get us prepared. And then she said, we're going to have a very hard landing, so you have to pay attention. You know, put your heads down, put your hands back. I mean, I really paid attention, and how many times I've been on the plane, I've heard the story about everything, and you read, I really paid attention. Now, I looked outside, and I thought, what could possibly be happening? There's not a cloud in the sky. It's absolutely gorgeous out. So I did what every good Catholic does. I made an act of contrition, and then I made a second one, just in case my first one wasn't really right on target. And then people around me were getting very nervous. And I'm thinking, well, I need to do something. And you have to be so politically correct. So I said, everyone must believe in a being somewhere, right? So I said, I think we need to just pray, calm down. I think we're going to be fine. Obviously, we were okay. I'm here telling you the story. And so people were saying, this, but I felt bad because there were young people that were really afraid, and they were crying, and they were really young adults. And I was thinking, wow, I never thought this is how I was going to die. I had pictured it this way. I'd be lying on the bed. The sisters would be all around me. What a wonderful sister she was. God has called her too soon in her life. They'd be saying prayers, talking about all the wonderful things I did and how well loved I was. I don't want to die in a plane crash. I don't even know these people. So I said, I can't think that way, can't think. So then I said, oh my gosh, what if I don't die? What if I get into this horrible state of I'm totally paralyzed because whatever way this plane is going to crash? And I said, stop thinking, and I let it go. I just let it go. And I said, Jesus, I'm yours, and whatever happens, give me the strength to get through it. Well, we landed hard, but not as hard as I've landed in some other plane rides, but anyway, we landed. And there was a gentleman on the plane who was bald, and he said, I had hair when I got on this plane. And so he kind of broke the tension, So anyway, I got off the plane, and this poor lady kind of keeled over towards me. And I kind of propped her up a bit. And this gentleman, these guys said, Sister, I was so glad you were on the plane, so glad. I looked at him and he said, thank you. And I said, I had nothing to do with this. God took care of us. And the people go by, yes, it was God. God took care of us. Well, what happened was, the long story short, the wingtips, they couldn't direct them. So they weren't sure if they're going to land us correctly. But anyway, this is my point. There was a point to this story, I promise you. When I landed, there were two things I needed to do. I mean, that was an emotional ride I went through. Call my sibling sister, my real sister, who's the oldest in our family. I have 2 brothers and 2 sisters. But there's just something, because my mom and dad had already been and were in heaven. I just felt I needed to call her to connect. So I called her immediately and said, I'm okay, but this is what happened. She says, oh my gosh, call me later and tell me the whole story. Then I called one of our sisters. And the sister I called, she said to me, this is what she said. I mean, she was glad I was okay and everything. And then she says, I'm so glad you did not call me while you were on the plane, because people were calling their families. Because what she said was, I don't know what I would have said to you. And boy, and she was being honest. And I thought afterwards, what would I have wanted her to say to me? And then I realized in my suffering, in my emotional pain, in my concern, what I really needed her to do was to listen to whatever it was I needed to say. I don't know what it would have been. I don't know what my famous last words would have been. But she didn't have to say anything. She did not have to fix it. She just had to listen. And then I thought about it. I said, if she really had to say something to me, I wonder what I would want her to say. And this is what I thought of. 2 things. I have been loved, and my life had meaning and purpose. That's all. And how often do I sit by the bedside of people who are dying, and I think about that. And I say to them, you have been so loved. You have been so good to all of us. Your life has touched many other lives. That's what's so important. It's not about all these other things that are going on. You are a good person. Thank you. They may not be able to respond to me. Many, many times they are unable to respond. But just to know that, you could be present and to let them know that their life has great meaning. And even in this body that is in the end stage of Alzheimer's disease, where they're in a fetal position and are unable to speak. So often our residents who have memory concerns or problems will be telling you the same story over and over again. In 1939, I got married. It was a terrible rainy day. But when I came out of church, there was this big rainbow. I knew I did the right thing. And you hear the story, and you go in, and they'll say, did I ever tell you about how it rained on my... And you're like, yes, you've told me that story a zillion times. But you don't. You listen. You listen to what's important in their life. So when I can't respond to you now, in my pain or in my end stage of Alzheimer's disease, what are you saying? You're holding me, you're holding my hand, or you're present, and you say, do you remember in 1939 when you got married and it was raining? You are connecting me to myself. You're connecting me to something much broader than, yes, I am still here. And I have someone who listened to me, who compassionately listened to me. And then we have familial pain in palliative care that we have to relieve. It can be caused sometimes by a lack of understanding of what each person is experiencing or the disease process. It can be very difficult to be expressed by family members. And then we have the spiritual pain. Maybe a person loses their connection to God and they're angry with God. They may not find comfort in their prayers. And then there's this angel that comes along, and it's you sitting alongside the bedside or just visiting. And something you say, or somehow just you're listening, they say, can you say a prayer with me? Because they just need to get that anger out and say, I'm so angry with God. No, don't be angry at God. That's not a good idea. Just let me say what I have to say. And you help me, whatever that suffering is deep within, I'm getting it out. And now I'm naming it. And now I'm able to come to peace. So palliative care is extremely important because it provides care of the whole person. It's not just looking at physical pain. It's looking at all the pains that a person may experience. The body is not the measure of healing. Peace is the measure of healing. Somebody who was very ill with cancer said this. And basically what their whole premise was, yes, I have cancer and I'm dying, but I'm very peaceful. Peaceful about a lot of things. Those pains, that physical pain, emotional, spiritual, I've come to peace in all those areas. So the naming of God's presence is so important when we do theological reflections, because it can call us to a change, call us to a confirmation, or it calls us to a challenge of what we might be experiencing. And what I'd like to do now is just give you like a 7.5-minute break. And we're going to come back and we're going to talk about the reflections in Scripture that lead us through people who have suffered and how Jesus took them through, and how each and every one of us has that talent within us to be able to be that person for people who are suffering. So if you take 7 minutes, and when I say 7 minutes, I mean 7 minutes. Sister Mary Rose will come after you. Would anybody be willing to kind of share what they're defining suffering as? I'm just going to make some notes. Anyone want to maybe yell out some words about suffering? How do you define? Yes?
Inability to relieve the pain.
Inability to relieve the pain. Okay, very good. Yes?
Sadness and anxiety.
Sadness and anxiety. What else do we have?
Anger.
Anger. Thank you.
Guilt.
Guilt. Very good. Yes.
Control.
Loss of control and being alone. Loss of control. Okay.
Inner turmoil.
Inner turmoil. Okay. What else we got? I'll read the list. Inability to relieve the pain, sadness, anxiety, anger, guilt, loss of control, inner turmoil, being alone. Do those sound like pretty good descriptions? I know that you were telling stories about some of the things that you've experienced, and I'm sure some of these words probably now can be applied to those experiences that you were talking about. As you reflected on some more, and that's really just for your own reflections, we don't have to go through them. I really want to get into the suffering piece. But suffering is a mystery, isn't it? It's a challenge for all of us who have suffered. I think that lots of times each person's story is very unique. And just standing up here, I was listening to some of the stories, and not that I could hear them well, but I can tell you were starting to tell those stories to one another about how you have suffered. And you probably put together how often you might have said or have heard another struggle to understand the suffering experience while going through it. And what they say is, I didn't understand it. I don't understand I had to go through that. And what happens to us many times is we never actually know in that present moment what precisely is happening to us. And we're too busy trying to cope, right? Sometimes from minute to minute. So we're not at really, and it's usually, maybe frequently long afterwards that we've been through the suffering that our eyes might be opened, and then we begin to understand why we went through that suffering. Sometimes it's changed us. Maybe it challenged us to look at something differently. And maybe it's helped us to embrace new attitudes or recognize different ways of looking at that suffering. But I can tell you this much, it's different for each of us. No people suffer the same. If we reflect upon God's presence, especially during a serious illness or serious time in our lives where we are experiencing some suffering, I really encourage you, which I know you probably already do, and I'm not making an assumption here, but I really encourage you to look at the scriptures because it helps us to make very sound moral decisions when we are going through a suffering and we're experiencing pain. I want to go back to the fact we have to stay on the truth that life is precious, that life is to be respected. Life is sacred. I think what I love about my name, just to give you the reason why I have my name, Sister Peter Lillian. Peter was my father, Lillian was my mother. Lillian was my real name too. So I remember when I was wanting to get, when we have to say what names we're going to be taking, and I had already told my parents I wanted to take Peter Lillian. And my father just kind of grinned, and I looked at my mom and I said, "What do you think, Mom?" She says, "Well, I think Lillian Peter sounds good too." But I kept that name because I often think about, I have my faith because I had two parents that really taught me well. They were, I'm Italian. I don't know if you noticed that I'm using my hands a lot, but I'm Italian, and for us, in my tradition, as someone who came from that heritage, the three things that were extremely important for us as Italians: faith, family, and food. The three F's. But family and faith were so important. And I know my parents, I don't know what I would have done if they had been different, but they struggled to make sure all their 5 children went through school, went through college, got degrees, because they did not have that. My father came over from Italy in the early 1916 and wanted, his children to have a great life. So he and my mother were very faithful to their Christian roots, to their Catholic faith. And I love the fact that my father's name was Peter, because I love St. Peter. I'm like him in many ways. I sometimes speak before I think. And I think oftentimes Peter would do that. And in the first, if you recall, I'm going to just read it in Matthew, the first prediction of the Passion. This is what I love about Peter. I'm going to read this, and I quote, "From that time on, Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer greatly from the elders, the chief priests, and the scribes, and be killed, and on the third day be raised." Then Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. "God forbid, Lord, no such thing shall ever happen to you." He turned and said to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan. You are an obstacle to me. You are thinking not as God does, but as human beings do." I love Peter. See, I think in that time, certainly in that time, Peter just acknowledged the fact that Jesus was the Messiah. And what did the Messiah mean in that time, in the Jewish tradition and back? The Messiah, they probably thought was going to be this king, just like David. And he was going to take over. But our Lord's explanation is so different. What does he do? He provides a synopsis of what's going to happen to him. That he's got to go to Jerusalem, he's going to be put to death, and he's going to be raised up on the third day. See, that's what God wanted. That's what God wanted. Not that God wanted the suffering of his son, but that he wanted to show the depth of his love for us in and through the faithfulness and love of his son, and the faithfulness and love which would cost him his life. So what Peter says to Jesus is saying, that's not going to happen on our watch. Don't worry about it. You'll be fine. I could just hear him speaking to him. And Jesus rebukes him and says, "Peter, you're trying to prevent me from my destiny, accepting what the Lord has for me." What happens in this, we know the end of the story, so we got to be kind to Peter. Peter misses something really important what Jesus says. He says he's going to suffer and get killed, but on the third day, what's going to happen? It's going to be raised up. Somehow Peter missed that point. He got stuck in the suffering. He got stuck in the death. He missed the raising up. I remember a priest one time saying, "You and I have an advantage because we know how the story ended in our Lord's being raised up from the dead. The cross looked like utter defeat, but it was the ultimate triumph." That is what it is for our Lord, and that is what it is for us. But what I love about the scriptures, you hear these stories, and you just can't help but come into them. And then we go on to the next chapter, and what happens? Jesus takes Peter, James, and John onto the mount, right? And the transfiguration takes place. So he tells them the bad news. This is what's going to happen. I'm going to die, and it's not going to be pleasant. But let me show you where I'm going. Isn't that beautiful? And what happens? They're up on the mount, and he's transfigured before them, and they can't even see him. They can't even look. It's just so beautiful. And they hear a voice saying, the voice comes down and says, "This is my beloved son, in whom my favor rests. Listen to him." Can you see how the scriptures tells us how our life, if we can just trust? Blessed are the poor in spirit. What does that mean? Total trust, total abandonment to God. No matter how difficult it's going to be, if we can get to the point and say, "Okay, God, I'm in this darkness, but I know your hand is there. Let me just hold on. You are going to get me through this." Once we accept that, the peace comes. And just like me on the plane, I was expecting to die differently. I mean, I still don't know how I'm going to die. But once I said, okay, this is it, I became peaceful. And, I just trusted. And I thank the Lord that, we survived that. And actually, in that whole plane story, the next day, I got to give you the rest of that story. It's important. The next day, I was leaving. I was only there 24 hours, wherever I was. And this person came over to me and said, "Sister, I was on the plane with you yesterday." She says, "No one will," and excuse my language, she says, "but no one will know the hell we experienced in those 8 minutes in that sky, except for those of us in there." That is so true about life. Sometimes you cannot express what happened unless you were actually there. The best part was I got on the plane, and it's the same stewardess, which was fine. She said, "Sister," I said, "Oh, hi." And this little head comes out from the cockpit, and it's the same captain. He goes, "Hi, sister, how you doing?" I said to him, "Can you please tell me this is not the same plane?" It's not, so. But, in that scripture passage, when Peter misses that whole thing about, there's going to be this raising of the dead, and then they go through the transfiguration, we just have no better teacher. I can't think of any better teacher than Jesus in the scriptures to help us to understand what suffering means and how we get through it. He talks about the importance of being with the person, the presence. I think the Stations of the Cross, the sorrowful mysteries. We all think, well, we're going to do all in our power in this world to not suffer. And we're going to die happy and not suffer. Yet Jesus is saying to us, I've been through it. And I've been through it, and I've gotten... When we look at the sorrowful mysteries, just think, the agony in the garden. Jesus, what does he say in the agony in the garden? Abba, Father, all things are possible to you. Take this cup away from me. But then he says, but what I will, but I have to give it to what you will. Not what I will, but what you will. His complete surrender of total trust in his Father's will. It's easy, it's hard, it's easy, it's hard. We can say that, but when somebody's in excruciating pain, then we have to help alleviate that pain physically. But when somebody's in excruciating pain because of emotional pain, it takes a lot longer to help that person. Our physical pain is a little bit easier to relieve, as I said earlier. So Jesus was really experiencing some quite, agony in there. He was experiencing some true difficult pain. And then we take us through to the sorrowful mystery, the second sorrowful mystery, the scourging at the pillar, which each strike against his flesh, that physical pain he experienced. And then we see in the sorrowful mysteries the crowning of thorns, the mental pain, the mental anguish people experience. Jesus experienced that. And then he carries the cross. And every step is weighed down by the emotions. What that must have felt like for him. Everybody ran away. And he's walking those stations. His mother was still there. John was still there. And who does he meet along the way when he does the Stations of the Cross? Veronica wipes his face, gives him the courage, the strength. The women who weep for him. Simon, who helps carry the cross. All these people are helping him through, again, this emotional pain that he is experiencing. You are the Veronicas. You are the Simons. You are the women who weep and the men who weep. That's who we should be for one another. Because palliative care says we are looking at all of those pains, and we just have to look at the sorrowful mysteries to understand that. And then certainly the crucifixion, the fifth sorrowful mystery, as he begins the dying process. Who's there at the foot of the cross? The Marys, certainly his Blessed Mother. He sees familial pain. He sees his mother in such pain watching him suffer as he is suffering. And immediately, he's dying on the cross, and what does he say? He says, John, here is your mother. He still gives a word of encouragement and love. They don't leave him. Many people did. And I'm not judging any of those people. I don't know where I would have been. They stayed. They showed compassion. They suffered with our Lord until he died. And all that they did is their compassion is affirmed in the glory of the resurrection in God's plan. I think people, when they get their diagnosis, oftentimes, they may feel condemned and alone as they receive their cross. And what happens? They begin to walk their own stations, and they may fall. And people are there to help pick them up and say, don't worry, I'm here. I'm going to stay with you. Their loved ones are nearby. We know that Jesus accepts his suffering for the sake of his brothers and sisters. He understands that the will of his Father is to be done for him to proclaim God's glory. Jesus' life doesn't end on the cross. We know that. But rather it continues through his resurrection. One of my favorite stories, another theological reflection, is in the Emmaus story. Because we go from the prediction, we go through the transfiguration, we go through now Jesus' passion and the Easter glory. And what happens in the Emmaus story? We find the power of what it means to accompany one another. What does Jesus do? He comes upon these disciples, right? They're walking and they're probably saying, can you believe what just happened? Oh my gosh, he was supposed to be the Messiah. He died like everybody else. This is horrible. But Jesus comes to them as a stranger. They don't recognize him right away. Isn't that beautiful? And he says, what's going on? What's the matter with you? You're the only one in Jerusalem that hasn't heard what's happened? And what does Jesus do? Doesn't do anything, but listens. He walks with them. He accompanies them. And it's not until after they finish speaking that he speaks about the scriptures. And he reminds them that the prophets said the Messiah would suffer and die. And in doing so, he would enter eternal glory. He starts connecting all of the pieces. When we're with someone who is in pain and suffering, what do we help do? What can we help do when we use palliative care? We listen to their story. And maybe we help connect, and maybe they connect by themselves, but we help connect. They are so moved by his listening, they ask him to stay. Mino, stay with us. So he does, and he goes and he eats. And when he breaks the bread, what happens? They recognize him in the breaking of the bread. That very encounter, and allows them, listening to his story and recognizing him in the breaking of the bread, brings peace to them. That what do? They go back to Jerusalem. It all makes sense now. We need to still be a part of what his life was all about. Yes, his suffering was there, but we're a part of being able to spread the word. And I think what's so beautiful about the Emmaus story, that they see the Lord. See, the Lord is always with us. We know that, And sometimes when we begin to doubt, we may need another person to remind us, especially when we're suffering. We don't expect to find God in pain. We expect to find him in joy. This was the great discovery of those two disciples on their way to Emmaus. That the event that they had experienced, and Jesus is taking time to listen, gave meaning to what had happened. They had lost faith in him. But after encountering our Lord and truly recognizing him at the meal and the breaking the bread, and they return, it's when they felt, I really believe it's when they felt all seemed lost, and they had nowhere else to turn, and they were deciding to give up. And I think this is why it's so important for us to understand what the true meaning of suffering is. And again, it's a mystery. That they seemed and they sensed the Lord's walking with them in a way they had not experienced before. Isn't that beautiful? That if we let go and let God, we feel his presence like we've never experienced before. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for they will inherit the kingdom of God. We trust. I think we don't talk in this language with people anymore. We sometimes just lose it. We just want to be able to give them the facts. Let me look up what that pain means. It means, according to Google, it says, we need to bring it back to what did God say? What did Jesus tell us? What is the value of human life? It's a life that is worth living and to be honored and to be shared. So oftentimes, we're the Simons or the Veronicas, we're the women who weep. For me, I think it's a great privilege. I think the work that our ministry is, it's an awesome ministry. I would not want to be doing anything else, but that's for me. But it doesn't mean that I'm the only one that can do this. Obviously not. We can be that for one another, because I feel it's such a privilege for me, anyways, to sit by the bedside of those who are critically ill and in the dying process. That's when I think we can begin to understand the sacredness of life and the sacredness of this time for families and friends as they share in conversations and sometimes in the silence. Assisted suicide can rob people of that experience. I wouldn't, change anything. God was very good to my family and to myself. I was with both my parents when they died. I was so grateful. There were stories, there were things that they shared, the grandchildren around them. And they died, thank you to the Lord, peacefully, but they had all that they needed. Their family, their faith, and yes, the food. We were still sharing in what they had taught us. So we can witness when we're around someone and understand really what that compassion means, which literally means to suffer with. And for me, it's to honor their shared experiences when I'm with them and to accompany their loved ones and on their journey to God. I think we have tools that we can use. I mentioned one, the Ethical Religious Directives. They have a lot of scripture, and you can get these right off of the USCCB. You can order them. Palliative care is the best option to relieve suffering. I truly believe that. The dignity of the human person should always be first. And I think assisted suicide takes away the dignity of the human person. I don't care what people say, we want to die in dignity, so I'm going to choose the day. I'm going to be able to take 100 pills and then I will be gone and I have controlled my destiny. Well, did you control your birth? God brought you to life. So wait till God asks you to come back, whatever that might be. And he sends his instruments to help. I've told you about Oregon. I want to give you some statistics from Oregon. And I'll quote from what they have to do in Oregon, and I would hate to think New York is going to go down this track, that we have to start giving statistics as to how many people actually committed assisted suicide, so on and so forth. I'd rather say how many people have been a part of palliative care. Tens of thousands of people in New York are experiencing good palliative care. We don't even know what assisted suicide means in this state, in this country. That's what I would really love to change if I was apt to change any policies. But here I quote, the Oregon Death with Dignity Act allows terminally ill Oregonians who meet specific qualifications to end their lives through the voluntary self-administration of a lethal dose of medications expressly prescribed by a physician for that purpose. The Act requires the Oregon Health Authority to collect information about the patients and physicians who participate in the Act and to publish an annual statistical report. In 2018, I'm still quoting, 249 people received prescriptions under the Death with Dignity Act. As of January 22nd, 2019, 168 people had died in 2018 from ingesting the prescribed medications, including 11 who had received the prescriptions in previous years. It took them a while to think about it. Characteristics of the DWDA patients were similar to those in previous years. This is the important part I want you to really reflect upon. Okay? Most patients were aged 65 years or older, 79%, and most had cancer, 62%. During 2018, 2 physicians were referred to the Oregon Medical Board for failure to comply with the requirements. Okay? Here's the part that is extremely important. In their 2019 report, which reflects the 2018 data, and they had to change a little bit because there was an other on there, but that doesn't really mean anything. This is the important part. Well, it might have meant something, but for what I have to say. As in previous years, the 3 most frequently reported end-of-life concerns were loss of autonomy. That was number 1. Autonomy. Autonomy. Second, decreasing ability to participate in activities that made life enjoyable. Third, loss of dignity. Those are the 3 main reasons why people in Oregon chose assisted suicide. I want you to notice something. Did you hear physical pain? That is not one of the top. I mean, it's there, but it's not one of the top. Their top concerns, in my opinion, can be relieved by you and me through palliative care. As Christians, as Catholics, who believe in the healing mission of Jesus, which was entrusted to each of us, we've been all called, we have that moral obligation to relieve suffering. The top 3 reasons why people choose assisted suicide help us to understand that people facing life-debilitating illnesses and terminal illnesses seek assisted suicide because they are fearful of not having a choice, okay, not being able to participate in meaningful activities, and losing their dignity. Think of that. 3 areas that can be transformed into a journey of compassion by providing palliative care. Why can't we help people still have choice when they're dying? Why can't we still allow people to participate in whatever activity that they can based on whatever illness that they might be experiencing? And more importantly, why can't we make sure somebody has the dignity and the care that we give them at that end of life? 3 things that each of us in this room can help counteract. We have to look at the reasons why. And one of the things that I believe, and I truly think that we have to really stay on top of, is these people were not talking about pain, physical pain. They were talking more about emotional suffering, emotional pain, which may require them to have a consult, a psych consult. I don't know. They might have been very, very clinically depressed. I don't know the answers to those questions. But more importantly, I think we need to look at, okay, if this is what's attracting people to assisted suicide, I can speak all I want up here, but we need action. We need action from all of us. That when somebody receives a debilitating disease or news that is going to cause them to say, I'm all alone in this, where do I go with this? That we have services within our parishes, that we have services within our organizations that say, you will not be alone. We will do what we can to help you, and we will provide all that you might need. Pope Francis, on March 5th, and you may have seen this, he spoke about palliative care. And I quote, "Palliative care is an expression of the properly human attitude of taking care of one another, especially of those who suffer. It bears witness that the human person is always precious, even if marked by age and sickness. The human person, in fact, in whatever circumstance, is good in and of himself and for others, and is loved by God. For this reason, when life becomes very fragile and the end of earthly existence approaches, we feel the responsibility to assist and accompany the person in the best way." I mean, how else can we possibly help others? The Medical Aid in Dying Act, which is what we're looking at in New York, it's before us, which would allow the terminally ill to request physician-assisted suicide. It's another law that's going to disrespect life. You can say all you want about, it's to bring dignity, it's to allow someone to die the way they want, and I don't understand why they can't, it's their body, so on and so forth. That gift that God has given each person is to be respected. God's going to call each of us back in His time, and He loves us so much that no matter what cards will be handed to us throughout life, He's asked us to just trust Him. We're going to get anxious. We're human. And, you're going to get nervous about things and concerned. I don't believe we're ever going to get more than we can handle without God being by our side. God is there. He's asked us to trust Him. Blessed are the poor in spirit. They shall inherit the kingdom of God. What does it mean to be poor in spirit? To be totally dependent on God throughout the many challenges we may face that can cause suffering, and we just have to acknowledge the fact that He is present through good and, yes, through bad. It's very hard. Those pro-suicide organizations such as Compassion and Choices, we have to take our meaning of compassion back. We have to tell our stories. They keep telling their stories. They have a great way of going throughout the country and getting on organizations and associations, telling their stories. We need to tell our stories of how we were compassionate to our neighbor, and how this person who had this debilitating disease had everything they needed and was comfortable and was so peaceful. And we prayed together to the very last breath with their family, and that person too, trying to make the sign of the cross. In the ethical religious directives, and there's also the Catholic Health Association has a book called Caring Even When We Cannot Cure. The Catholic Church affirms that the morality of using medicine is to lessen pain, even in rare cases that these medicines might shorten one's lifespan. And basically, that's what we call double effect. You're going to give a person the medication to relieve the pain. You're not giving it to cause the death. Okay, so and there's a balance that we do, and we know it now very well. The ERDs explain that patients, on page, it's Directive 61, the ERDs explain that patients should be kept as free of pain as possible. And in his encyclical, The Gospel of Life, Pope St. John Paul II reaffirmed the teaching of Pope Pius XII and stated that it is proper to relieve pain by narcotics even when the result is decreased consciousness and a shortening of life. All recent popes from St. John Paul to Francis have endorsed palliative care. Palliative care makes suffering more bearable. And if you read through the ERDs and you look through all the encyclicals, you begin to see we have an enormous amount of tools and ways that we can help one another. And I think, it's hard because we have to talk truth. Why are we afraid to say life is precious? Why are we, I don't know. It's almost like, well, I understand what you're saying. But yeah, life is precious. It's sacred. And when I say that, and I say I'm pro-life, I mean from the womb to the tomb. I also mean that if I truly believe life is precious and it's a gift from God, then I respect the unborn. I respect the person who is homeless. I respect the environment. I respect those who are dying. I do not believe in capital punishment because life is sacred. I am not the one that should be the one to say, it's over. It's time. I leave it with the person who gave me that life, who created me. The only person, the only being that I know of who can take something out of nothing and create. Creation means to take something out of nothing and make it something. Well, God's the only one that can do that. There's an evilness, I think, going around that we have to be careful of. And it's a very insidious way of getting that evil through. And we're becoming very secular about how we think of things. We have to bring it back to where God is. On page 3 in the ERDs, it says, Jesus' healing mission went further than caring only for physical affliction. He touched people at the deepest level of their existence. He sought their physical, mental, and spiritual healing. And in John, he came so that they might have life and have it more abundantly. I think we can hopefully agree that palliative care is quite the antidote to assisted suicide. I'm hoping that I gave you enough to think about. I'm hoping that if there's anything that we, the Carmelite sisters, can help you with, we're available. You know how to get us. Yes, Maria.
I have a question.
Sure.
I'll give an example. My aunt died of a disease in this moment, scleroderma, and little by little.
Yes, her body was.
She didn't want to be seen again because
Right.
she was deformed completely, constricted in the breathing, which is painful to be seen, but she had the dignity of not wanting to be seen. And the family was around, but she didn't want to be seen from outside. So there is the kind of pain of the
embarrassment.
For a woman in particular, being deformed and that.
Yeah.
Then when I go to a little bit to hospitals and you have people who are lost the sphincter ability, and of course they know they are creating smell. They don't want to be seen. Again,
Right.
Women and men. What do you do with that? Because you can tell, oh, you are precious. They don't want to be seen.
Right. Well, the one thing that I think is really important is to respect what they want. And if they don't want you be seen, then you respect that, but you also provide the support services they need. What is it that they need? Not what I want to be able to do and say, oh, I did a great job. What is what that person needs? And I think in your description, because the scleroderma, you start losing your ability to, in your hands and everything starts just. I've met someone who has had that, and in that case, yeah, it's easy for me to say, well, you're still precious in the sight of God, but I'm not going through all that pain. What a person really needs at that point when they're experiencing that is just to know someone is going to be along. And it's not all of you that can do that. Not all of us can do that. To sit by the bedside of someone who may be having diarrhea every 2 minutes and you're having to change them. That's why, the nurses, I don't think nurses realize how they're called to this life from, God, because they have this innate, what I want to call it, it's just this wanting to give of themselves and to be able to just do it in such a dignified way and be able to care for this person who is so hard. It's the stench of cancer sometimes. How do people go in there and are able to change those wounds? These are special calling. I'm talking about, thank the Lord for people who say yes to that special calling. What I'm talking about for us is to be able to be present wherever that person needs us. It might be that just to know that even though my body doesn't look like it should anymore, you're still willing to come in and visit with me for about 15 minutes and just pray with me. And even though I feel in my memory impairment, you're looking at me like I have making no sense, you're still sitting and just being patient with me. We all have different gifts that we can bring to palliative care. Someone's going to be able to care for that person's body from A to Z and be able to do it in such a dignified, gentle way. I may not be able to do that. But once the person is quiet and sitting and respecting that they only want maybe certain people seeing them, not for me to get upset about them and say, why wouldn't they want me there? I don't understand. We have to, I think this is the important thing is to remember is that whomever is going through whatever illness it might be, we have to understand and be attentive to their perspective, not, what we think. We have to understand and be able to know that their perspective is much more important than their actual living situation because they're the ones going through it. That's where that empathy comes from. So I think what you described, I appreciate that. Not all of us is going to be able to go in and do the changes and the things that are needed to be done. But I might be able to be the person that goes shopping for that family member. That's a palliative care moment. I might be the person that just sends a note that I can read. Yeah, I don't want you here, but thank you. Yes, I remember when we went to the Grand Canyon. It was beautiful. Those are palliative care moments. I think sometimes when we think palliative care, we only think the physical things we're going to do for someone. It's looking at the whole person and providing whatever support services we can. And it could be saying, we're saying a rosary for you every day. We're still saying the rosary after Mass, and you're on the list. It's just those things that I might need to hear, to know that I haven't lost my connection because my body's deformed. People still saw that my life had meaning and I was loved. Does that help? I don't know. Yes?
I don't have a question, but I have a comment in regard to physician-assisted suicide, in that I have this tremendous inability to understand how physicians who take an oath to help patients, and I don't know what else the oath says, but it's all doing good stuff, how they can provide the medicine to kill somebody off and knowingly do that. And for the people that feel that my body, my choice is the same thing with abortion, which is one of their main things, my body, my choice, which is so against everything else that the Catholic Church teaches.
Yeah, and I have a hard time understanding that too. That's why we can't take a neutral stance ever, either. Some people, some associations are taking neutral stances. Which is, when you take a neutral stance, you've taken a stance. Either you are for or you are against. and in every being. And that's why the government has no right, the legislators have no right to tell this physician how they should be taking care of this person. And now, oh, you've got the law, it's legal, you can do that. No, it's two separate things. So, question over there. Yes?
I just wanted to say, what you said about loss of autonomy, that was one of the main things that people fear or cause them to want to commit assisted suicide. There's two ways of looking at that. One is a natural loss. Like, as a Catholic Christian, I don't like being in the position of being cared for. I'd rather be the one, I'm so used to being the caretaker for my kids. I just hate that feeling like I can only stay in bed and wait, for you to care for me. And it's emotional and it's difficult, and I don't want to do it, and it's a natural spiritual battle I have to fight, like to put myself in the care receiving mode, right? And it must get, I just know it's going to get too hard for me. But then there's this other loss, and that's loss of autonomy I think we're all going to go through, right? Some are going to have a harder time, but this other loss of autonomy they're talking about is like, no person should be dependent on other people. And we're gods, like we're little gods who should be, making these decisions all for ourselves. And I think those are two very different kinds of loss of autonomy. One is really kind of natural, even for a good Christian to experience, and the other one is diabolical. It's like, it's really saying there's no God, or I'm a rival to God. It's like Satan, what he said, what he did. And so when you come up against the first one, which I would say, I know it's natural and it's like has supernatural elements, but it's kind of in our province to help. But the other one that's saying, when you meet even an elderly person who just doesn't, they want to take the reins, right? And you really need spiritual help. You need like a massing. It's like the big battle, and that. I feel there are almost two different ways of losing autonomy.
Yeah, and I that's very very perceptive of you. And I think as we get older too, control is really important all our lives, right? And as we get older, it even becomes more important because we're losing control of so many things. So we tend to focus on I want to be able to still sit in this chair, leave me alone, and it gets the world of control gets a little smaller because now that's all I can control. I can't do all that other stuff. But I think certainly the being dependent on somebody else, none of us want that. I mean, as Americans, that's really big. We love to be independent of everything. And I think that's those virtues of patience, of humility that says to us, well, maybe it's time for someone else to feel as I have been able to care for, allow them to now have that wonderful feeling of being able to care for me in a very, dignified way. There was a study done one time on, and I think it was Rush University, but I'm not sure, but I want to say it might have been them. But they were looking at the brain, and they were trying to see, okay, where are the areas of pleasure that are done in the brain when somebody receives like chocolate and it lit up. When people cooperate, that same area lit up. So as we're relational human beings, and when we cooperate, I often think of, it's very hard for me, and especially as someone who is a religious, to have people do things for me. I feel like I have to give, and always do. But then I realize that in my humility, I have to stop and say, allow someone to also use their gift of giving and helping and being charitable. I may be, taking them, I'm not robbing, but maybe not allowing them to develop in that way. But we are people who love to care for, certainly as Christians and Catholics. It's ingrained in us. Yes.
I have a brother, very intelligent man all his life. Graduated from high school at 16 and college at 20. he has been diagnosed dementia. I've been down with him quite a bit. I used to sleep in the room next to him. One night, the aide knocked on my door. You know, I tell him if they need him. And he had, diarrhea. He would not let her help him because he wanted to wait till the morning when mail came. Okay. So I went in and I talked to him, and he didn't want to do it. Finally, and I think the Holy Spirit came to me. I said to him, if it was me, would you help me? And he didn't answer me. And then I said to him, I'm going to go into the aide had put things down, pads. I said, the aide has the pads over there on your bed. I'm going to go into the bathroom. I will bring you warm towels, wet towels. And I said, nobody's looking at you. I said, you can very quickly handle it. When I came out, as if he shouted it to me. He was laying there waiting. And it was so quick and easy.
Yeah.
It was, sometimes, if you put yourself into it, as I know he would help me.
Yeah. I mean, I think that was really you and the Holy Spirit working together. And, sharing that story is just an example of how sometimes we feel like we're going to be at a loss, but somehow the grace comes and you're able to do what it is.
If you listen,
Yes.
it comes.
Yeah.
Can you repeat what you said?
Yeah. I don't. Do you want it repeated for the film? Because we're filming, so.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. So I don't know if the questions will be on the film. It'd be more of what I've been speaking, right? It'll be just me. So maybe if you shut it off now so I can repeat what she said. I'll do it the short version.
You want the film off now?
Yeah, I think so, right? Because of the questions. I don't know if people, just so that they're.
I'm not filming the faces,
Uh,
but if the question-
Okay, I'll.
He's recording the questions, so.
Okay, he's recording the questions. Okay, so do you mind if I repeat a sense? Okay. Pretty much basically what happened is a family member has dementia and at this point needed care had some diarrhea. And the person was in the next room and the nursing assistant came and said, he won't let me care for him. And so the family member went in, and the family member then said to her family member, if this were me in this bed, would you want me to be cared for? And the person agreed, and they took care of it. That's kind of the gist of the story. So it was like putting themselves in there. We continue to be caring human beings, whether we're well or not well. And I think sometimes we have to tap into that charitableness that we still experience. And I think in the case of this family member, she was able to say, dear God, your Holy Spirit enlighten me. And that's what came to her, was to say, if this was me, would you want me to be cared for? Because he wanted to wait for a different aide in the morning. So, and sometimes that was, I think when, in our lives, in Sister Mary Rose's life and mine, we've been by the bedside with so many people and in so many instances, and we can tell you story after story of how things came to be, and families have reconciled while this person is dying, and they're in the room, and all of a sudden they realize what they had said to one another 20 years ago, didn't even remember what it was, but it caused them not to talk to each other. You've heard stories of people that might have, something has been bothering them for years and years, and all of a sudden they come to peace. It's just, those are the moments you don't want to rob somebody from, of deciding on your own when physician-assisted suicide should take place. Sister Mary Rose?
I think it's always interesting that one of the reasons for assisted suicide, for any of us struggle with loss of autonomy, and that's something probably our whole lives we look to be autonomous. But I think as Christians we're called to be, we're baptized as Christians, and we're not asked to self-govern. We have boundaries, we have God, we have the Holy Spirit who leads and guides us. And So I always think we're duped by society telling us we have autonomy, and I think that's what drags all of us, each one of us, into a sinful state because we want to be the governor of the God. We want to be the one that leads and controls. And true autonomy, that's a gift from God, but that's a gift that we surrender back to Him, that He can use us as instruments. And I think, to the point, how do we allow people to have some self-control in those moments of suffering? Do we send cards? Do we call? Do we remember in prayer? But we can be there to accompany and to help conversion within the person that's suffering and conversion in ourselves. But we have to be very careful that we know the truth. To come in and see John on the wall is the password. It's those kind of scriptures that will lead us in that suffering and lead us back, because that's a gift that we've been given in life, free will, but free will to choose and to surrender back. So I think that's where we sometimes hear autonomy, but autonomy in itself can lead us to loneliness. And we're called as Christians to move to aloneness where God can fill us.
Thank you. Excellent. Yes.
Okay.
Is this palliative care you're talking about, is that on an individual basis, just as volunteers, like in a community setting, not as an organized?
Well, in our long-term care facilities, we have we actually was doing palliative care since 1929 when our founders started our community. And we make sure we have what we call a palliative care culture, so that everyone's involved in that. Even the housekeeper and dietary understands what palliative care is.
Is it in the hospital?
Yes, the hospitals actually have palliative care teams. So if somebody is experiencing some difficulties, whatever it might be, they may call for a palliative care consult that comes in. They are able to do that. They get reimbursed. And in the nursing homes, we don't get reimbursed for palliative care. We do it anyway. It's not only in the hospitals and in healthcare, and it's very big. There's different organizations. We belong to what we call the Supportive Care Coalition. It's a group of Catholic organizations that are dedicated to palliative care.
Volunteers?
We are, no, because we're healthcare organizations. But one of the things our community is doing is we call the Mother Angeline Ministries of Care. It's a parish-based ministry where people can go out and care for the elders. And a lot of these concepts I talked about today is what people learn, and we teach them. And those are volunteers. So, but there you can go to a nursing home or a hospital and ask to volunteer in that aspect of palliative care, whatever it might mean for that organization. So I think there's doctors there's certifications in palliative care and nursing and social work. Doctors are certified in palliative care. So palliative care is been around, but I think it's getting even more attention, and we need to bring it to the forefront and have more attention to it.
Yeah. We will be having a part 2, this palliative care series, and we'll be working on those. It won't be until the springtime, and the idea behind it, it's not set up yet, but the idea behind it is, what do we do now? What are the logistics? If you want to participate and volunteer in the palliative care, I had never heard of the Mother Angeline Ministries. Okay, that could be something that we will work on, and so that people who attend that conference can volunteer. We'll be working on that. What are the logistics? What do you do? How do you organize all the things, the palliative care moments, that sort of thing? So that'll be a conference in the springtime. If you want to get your name on a list, we'll make sure that you get it. Okay? Because that's what you're looking for. You're looking for experiences. You're looking for something to do yourself at this time, right?
Well, no, I'm just saying, I didn't know if you were presenting this as this is what you should do as individuals, or...
Well, I think you can do it as an individual.
That's what part 2 will be. Is what we do as individuals, what you can do as an individual, what kind of associations can we get going in the community, and what kind of things we can do to try to stop the legislation. That's going to be the focus of part 2.
Yeah.
So there's also, like you were saying, there's a kind of that mucky line where somebody's on morphine or on, you're heading that way. And is that not, in a way, you know what I mean? That's a mucky area there where it's not assisted suicide, but you're not
called the double effect. It's not mucky. It's pretty clear, I think.
Yeah, I think,
Your purpose is to
Double
relieve,
effect. You know what I'm
but your
saying?
purpose is to relieve pain, so that people don't suffer, right? So
Right,
you relieve the
yeah,
pain,
but-
physical pain. And the second result is it might.
Fine line.
Right,
And
right.
in healthcare, you have to understand that fine line and make sure you don't cross it.
Right.
But it's a
That's what I'm
fine
saying, like,
line.
it seems like they could almost make an argument.
well, I think it's an important thing to understand that, yes, there is a fine line, but if somebody is suffering in front of you and they're having excruciating pain, you are going to give them the amount that is going to help cause them to be relieved of that pain. That's what you're concentrating on. You're not even thinking about, I'm going to give them a dose so then in 10 minutes they'll be gone. You're saying, okay, I can give this amount that will relieve the pain and allow them to relax a little bit more. Especially, morphine causes your respirations to go down, but it's also because people are getting anxious towards the end, and it helps, cause the anxiety and the breathing, and they're more comfortable. So you want people to be comfortable. And that's what we have to make sure, that all physicians and people are well trained in pain management for that reason. Yes?
Sister, can you just take a few moments to tell us about a conversation, how you would have the conversations that we've been having here with non-Christians or fallen away Christians? Because a lot of, what we try to convey is the value of suffering and the value of living life. And how exactly, can you do that with folks who just are, to use the word, duped
Yeah.
by what the media tells them is worthwhile life versus non-worthwhile life?
Yeah, I think, some of the things I've talked about certainly come from our Catholic faith and our Christian faith. The question is, what about non-Christians? How do you have that conversation who want to do this, and you can't put it in the context of Jesus because they don't believe in Jesus, or an atheist maybe you're working with, or it could be somebody of another faith tradition. I think what we always have to start out with is say, I understand you are having some difficulties now. How can I help you? You start out with, where are they at in that pain? And then you bring them to, hopefully, anyone. It doesn't have to be, I don't have to be Christian to finally be able to start naming it, and it starts making sense. Like Jesus did. They were going on and on and on, and he started connecting for them. And that might be all a person might need to tell their story. And you stay with their story and help them to maybe say, well, wait a minute, I am loved. I do have reasons to continue to want to live until I die. Sometimes people just need that gentle conversation without bringing in all our Christian belief, because they're not Christian. We have to try to get to, just on a human level, I'm not going to abandon you. I will be here for you.
What I see a lot is they don't want to be a burden to their loved ones.
Mhm.
And they feel that at that point they are, and their lives are worthless.
Yeah, I think that's why it's so important to show that support, because people who feel that they are burdening someone, then it'd be better if I'm just not here anymore. I see you struggling. I see you coming in every 2 minutes trying to check on me. I know you're worried about my care, and they can go on and on and on. And it's that reassurance that none of us should ever feel they are a burden to anybody. And I think there are times that maybe we have to be better about allowing people to just be who they are in that illness and in that whatever they're experiencing. And if I'm not the one that can be as supportive, then maybe I need to say to somebody and say, could you go talk? Could you be with them? I know they're worried about me, and they're not listening to me, even though I say it's okay, I don't mind being here, I'll do all in my power to help you. They don't believe me, and the emotions are too high. So it might be another person that has to give them an opportunity to talk it through. There's many, many ways that it can be done, and that's what's great about a palliative care team, because they look at all these areas and they help walk people through. And you don't have to be Catholic to be a palliative care team. all those experts, the social workers, the nurses, the doctors, everyone contributes, pastoral care especially.
And I think there's no one answer to what conversation you can have, because it's relationship with that person so that that person can start communicating. And I think the key is, how do we receive what they say non-judgmentally and love them through this and then bring them forward, because they have to go through the conversion experience and understand what the purpose of their suffering is. And maybe they won't, but it's relationship with the family, that we walk with the family, we walk with the person that's suffering. It's not that one drop-in conversation and move out. I think sometimes at both ends of the spectrum are the hardest to kind of get through to, because they're fixed in their ideas. So it's bringing them to that middle ground and then and bringing them forward. It's those spectrums that are very, very difficult.
I'm sorry, what do you mean by both ends of the spectrum? What is it?
The one not believing, and the one that believes, that has no belief in God, and the one that is so staunch, and everything has to be done, and we can't take medication, we have to suffer, we have guilt, and I have to come to this. So it's sometimes very difficult to have people then realize that God is merciful, God is loving, and there is a purpose, but that is very hard to pull them into that. Because we all question. And I think sometimes having those conversations challenges our own thinking of it. And we have to know our source, and our root, because it can be challenging. It can call us to question.
And I think conversations, I think having days like this and taking more time and then participating in different certificate programs that help. There's something that we do call difficult conversations. All of those things are all part of what we have to build up our skills on. I realize it's time for you to go, and I don't want to keep you. It's a Saturday. But I hope today was helpful in any ways. I do have up here, it's just a little prayer card on the Sorrowful Mysteries. You're welcome to take one if you like. And I have up here just a little bit about who we are, the Avalon Institute. We're 31 years old this year. So we did a 30-year brochure. I thought, well, in case you want to know what we've done for the last 30 years, it might be something that you can take as well. So I want to thank you again, Martha, for inviting me, and thank you for all. Thank you.